FP Lee, welcome to Validated.
Happy to be on.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you here. Sanctum is a project we've been wanting to do an episode on for a while. I think the larger conversation of liquid staking, of what are the different uses and applications of liquid staking out of just sort of your boring application of skipping the unbonding period or being able to use it in DeFi. So yeah, you and your co-founder is like, it's a very cool project that's ended up getting built out here. So I know there's a long story behind this, but I wanted to also sort of start off today with a little bit of scene set on the liquid staking environment on Solana, how it differs from some of the other liquid staking solutions people are familiar with, especially Lido and Alluvial and all those in the Ethereum ecosystem as well.
So let me just sort of give a little bit of a history lesson, if you don't mind. This was back in 2021, right? And this was, I think, February 2021. And I think Don was the one who was in charge of this project of liquid staking. At the time, there was the initial liquid staking contract was being built out by John Sinke from Labs now at Anza.
Yes.
And I think probably he was working in conjunction with the Lido folks as well, the Chorus One guys. I think.
Yeah, this was one of the first things I worked on back
Really?
here as well. Was we went through, I think, 3 or 4 different iterations of how we should build liquid staking on Solana.
Yeah, I think that was good. So I didn't know at the time. I didn't know anything about Solana, but I saw this sort of request for quotation. I think. Asking for people to build a dashboard for the new stake pools that would soon come out.
Yes.
And I think most people sent in a proposal. I also sent in a proposal, and I got a sort of a Telegram message or email from Don one day, and he said like, "Oh wow, your proposal is like 40 pages long," and and most people send me like a 4-page proposal. So I really like to talk to you. And like one thing led to another. So we talked to him. He was very impressed, and he was like, "Let's build this dashboard." We thought famously. I told my co-founder at the time. I said like, "This is only going to take 2 weeks, and we're gonna make like $20,000. Like this is gonna be great, And just like 3 years later, more than 3 years later, we're still here. But yeah, so we were building this staking dashboard, and then we realized that a dashboard is quite useless because the contract wasn't deployed yet.
Yeah.
And we found like a couple of economic exploits in the contract, so we sort of raised it up with John Sinke, and one thing led to another. Is eventually we thought, well, if we're already doing so much work and contributing the stake pool contract, we may as well just deploy a stake pool of our own.
Certainly.
And that became Socian, right? And that was like the first SPL deployed stake pool. So the chronology, I believe, was Lido came first and then Marinade, or Marinade first and then Lido.
Yeah, Lido famously did not actually use the contract. They created their own.
Which is strange, right?
Yes.
And now they're paying the price. But, so Marinade, Lido, and then we were the first deploy of the sort of the official SPL staking contract, which John Sinke wrote and we helped to build.
Yeah.
But it didn't take long, it launched with much fanfare, right?
Yeah.
But it didn't take long for me to realize that something is not quite right.
Yeah.
Right. And so at the time, this was October 2021. And, this sort of like curve wars or saber wars or DeFi wars were in full swing. And, these two competitors had launched it. Well, Lido obviously had already the token, but Marinade launched the token very quickly, and they were fighting to fight for TVL, right? Fight for liquidity. And it was like, millions of dollars of their tokens given out, MND and LDO given as sort of liquidity incentives to put on Saber and Radium and Orca pools and the like. And I am quite a perfectionist when it comes to launching the token, which is why we're still here. So, after so long, and I was like, but I mean, in any case, I didn't really want to play this game, right?
Yeah.
I think like this is like a zero-sum game, and we had very mercenary liquidity farmers whose literal full-time job was to move like millions of sold, from one protocol to another and farm the liquidity mining rewards. And I thought this was a very silly game to play.
Yeah.
Right. And I kept thinking like there must be a better way. This is not the way to go. And it turns out that there is, right? Because the way that the stake pool contract is written on Solana is that when you do a withdraw from a stake pool, there is no withdrawal queue, right? Like there is on Lido, for example, right? there is an unbonding period, but the key is that you get the stake account right away, like this, right?
Yeah.
And then of course it's up to you to then sort of deactivate the stake account. But the fact that you can pull out a stake account directly from any stake pool, right? Any SPL stake pool, as well as the Lido implementation.
So I want to just like wind back a bit because we've gotten delightfully deep very quickly. But
sorry,
no, just to give like folks who are listening kind of an overview of some of the architectural differences in liquid staking on Solana. So Solana has native protocol delegation for staking, which is something that Ethereum does not have.
Mm-hmm.
On Ethereum, you need exactly 32 ETH, and then you can bundle it and stake it. But there is no way on a protocol level to combine a bunch of different people's stake to have enough to actually run a validator. This is why the liquid staking ecosystem on Ethereum, at least for a very long time, has been deeply correlated around one company because it was a company level implementation. It was not protocol level.
Mm-hmm.
The way that this works on Solana is if you have you have tokens, you create something called a stake account. You put those tokens into the stake account, and then you attach that stake account to a validator. The way liquid staking works is you're aggregating either multiple stake accounts or multiple token deposits into one or many validators. And so what you were describing is when you actually go to say, I don't want the LST anymore,
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to get a stake account, or I'd like to get SOL back. At least in the original implementation, you were actually getting a stake account back.
Exactly. Yes. I realized that sort of having been so deep in it
You've
for
been
too
doing
long,
it for 3 years.
I skipped so many steps, but this very helpful. But yes, I mean, in Lido, when you withdraw, I believe you get some sort of like a ticket, and then you're in the withdrawal queue, and you can wait up to 14 days and so on, right? This is very different on Solana. In Solana, you get the stake account right away.
Yes.
Right. And that one key technical difference just makes like all the difference, and it's what sort of Sanctum is built upon. So that is like the key insight, I think. What is the significance, right? The significance is that stake pools pretty much become fungible with one another.
Yes.
Right. So if you think about like let's leave aside those sort of slight technical contract differences, but between, let's say, if you have like the Soulblaze stake pool and the Jito stake pool, they both run the same SPL program, right?
Yeah.
And they have this thing called the validator list, right? And they have stake accounts corresponding to the validators in the validator list.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you want to go from B-Sol to Jito-Sol or vice versa, right? As long as there exists in this in the intersection of the sets between the B-Sol validator list and the Jito-Sol validator list, as long as there exists one validator, then you can perform a swap, right? And what that means is that you perform a withdrawal from B-Sol to get the B-Sol stake account, and you deposit that stake account into Jito-Sol to get the Jito-Sol, right? And this means that this means that, I mean, this is fungibility. That's kind of what it means, and you can do that in size with no slippage, right? That's the key.
And it sounds so simple and so obvious, but I mean, like as you're saying, this is not like a small feature. This is like a major technical difference between the way that liquid staking works on Solana and other places, and the way staking works on Solana versus other places, and it has all these upstream effects on the liquid staking environment too.
Yes, exactly. It's strange how this like tiny little, almost like implementation detail, could have sort of made such a big difference, because actually in the Marinade contract, before they didn't used to give you the stake account, they used to give you a ticket for the stake account.
Yeah.
And had we, had the contracts all use this ticket idea, these tickets would of course not be fungible with one another.
Right.
And then we maybe, this couldn't have all been built out. But it is what it is, and therefore sort of we sort of took this insight, and really what I tried to do is just carry it completely to its logical conclusion, right? Like a ad absurdum kind of thing. Right. So one of the things we started immediately to build was this thing called Unstake It, right? Which is like, okay, well, so at that point, right, we were thinking like, okay, so let's think about liquidity. A liquid staking token requires liquidity, right? So the whole point is that if you have a liquid token be sold, the idea is that you've got to get sold right away. That's the whole point. Otherwise, you might as well just be native staking.
Yeah.
And so and this is why all of them tried aggressively to court liquidity, right? In Radium Orca pools, right? This is like and what this looks like, I mean, everyone should be familiar with an AMM, but if you're not, it's like a B-Sol Sol pool, let's say, right? And then half of it is B-Sol, half of it is Sol.
And just to sort of say the obvious part, that is deeply capital inefficient, right?
Yes.
By any definition, you
Yes.
now have to say, okay, for let's say I have $5 million of staked SOL,
Yes.
that is all earning native APY from staking rewards,
Yes.
but all the liquidity is just passively sitting there earning nothing
Mhm.
until it's used. But when it's used, you're still in a hole relative to just having natively staked.
I mean, exactly. I mean, it's two couple of things. One is that, of course, now this, there's that hurdle of that SOL is just sitting there and not doing anything. But also that if you think about an AMM, right, usually there's demand that needs to be, like, let's think about USDC, USDT stable swap. There's demand to buy USDC and there's demand to sell USDC, right? But in a case of a BSOL, SOL, or MSOL, SOL, or GDOL, SOL pool, right, it doesn't quite make sense for you to have the BSOL side, because if you ever want to go from SOL to BSOL, there is a free and infinite, like, there's no slippage, infinite size. You can go from SOL to BSOL. It's just staking it or depositing it into the LST contract. So that part does not make sense. And worse yet, you have this fragmentation, right? Because now you've got this pool, this pool, this one, and all of them are fragmented, right?
Yes.
And so I thought to myself, right, what is this like platonic ideal of like an unstaking pool? And to me, I thought about it, and to me, it looks like just a pool of naked SOL, right, just sitting there, and it services stake accounts, which means that it services all LSTs, because LSTs are
right. And I guess hypothetically, it also services all stake accounts.
Yes. and so, a lot of, exactly. And so we built this thing called Unstake It, which was unstake.it. Now we've sort of retired the domain, but it was a cool name. And all of this is like unstake your SOL instantly, right away. And when you connect it, you could choose either an LST or you could choose any stake account, and we would just give you, like, quote you a fee, right, in order to do that. And I think that sort of almost entirely obviates all the all the stable Orca Radiant pools, because that, again, like, the main reason those pools are there is precisely to service this instant unstake.
So you can look at this from a few different ways. One is that you are aggregating all of the existing liquidity pools that were all for individual LST pairs and pooling them into one spot. Another way sort of to look at this is that you've sort of donated a bunch of SOL to making a non-existent market that is sort of an ephemeral market that only comes up when a user calls for it.
An ephemeral market. What does that mean?
So, like, each time I say I have this stake account, not even a liquid stake token,
stake
I want to unstake it instantly. You are creating a market for something that only exists for the duration of the transaction.
Right.
And then the market goes away, but there's sort of like you can sort of call it like on-demand liquidity.
Yeah.
Right. I can just sort of throw my hand up into the ether or the solther and say, I would like a quote for how much it would cost to get this much SOL instantly.
Yeah.
So
exactly. That's exactly what we do.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about how you did the fee modeling there, because obviously I think most people don't think of it this way, but staking is not really earning more money. It is actually downside protection.
Right.
So like the best way to think about it is, if you are not staking your SOL, you are basically getting deflated by whatever the inflation rate is. And if you're staking your SOL, what you're actually doing is maintaining your proportional pro rata ownership of the network.
Well, I kind of push back on that, actually.
Okay.
So I used to believe this was the case, but now with priority fees and with block rewards, block rewards are inflation. So but what about priority fees? What about MEV fees? Like, those are, you're providing a service that isn't really like just this inflationary part, right?
Well,
so
I guess I'd say there's then two components, right? So there's sort of the protocol native inflation rate, the issuance rate, whatever language you want to use for that.
And that's inflationary.
That is just like for example, the US, let's say there's about 5% inflation now. If I don't have my money in treasuries, I'm effectively losing 5% every year, right? My checking account gives me 0%. There's a similar analogy to be made there with staking, but the same way that, for example, if I were to make you a 7% USD loan and the inflation rate is 5%, I'm actually only getting 2% of real value on top of that. That 5% is just me catching up to inflation. So I guess that's the way I would look at priority fees and block rewards, is that is sort of the amount you're quote unquote getting paid.
Yes, that's the real yield.
But that floor yield is actually not actually inflation. It's not actually anything you're quote unquote making. That's just your protection against deflation.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I suppose that's yes. I think I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But sorry, getting back to
Where were we?
yeah, unstake it. So
Yes, yeah.
where did you
How
guys
do we
like?
charge the
Yeah,
fees?
how did you assess what the appropriate fee would be when I came to you and said, "Hey, I have a stake account or I have an
Right.
LST. I want to get out of this position today."
I think this is okay. So let me tell you how I do it right now,
Mhm.
right? And let me tell you how I think we should do it in the future. So right now we do it based on the amount of SOL that is left in the pool. In the reserve. So unstaked is now called the Sanctum reserve, and it is a reserve pool of SOL that
Mhm.
is just doing what we just described. And as so we look at one variable only, and it's called utilization rate.
Yeah.
And so when the pool is full, it's pretty cheap. It's like 5 bips or something like this. And then when it goes all the way to the top end, it becomes 500 bips. So it's like 5%.
Right.
And so in a situation where you get fully utilized, right, then that almost pays for it, kind of it, like
Sure.
almost a year of sort of stake. Well, not quite, but like it's
Yeah.
a significant chunk. But most of the time, it hovers, less than 10% utilization rate,
Yeah.
right? So that is the stuff. So I guess whether or not this is so I mean this is definitely not optimal. I think,
Sure.
right? I think one should probably think about some sort of dynamic fee model, and I think in the ideal case, we were thinking about almost building like this stake account marketplace,
Yeah.
right? Which is to allow people to kind of like buy and sell these things, like.
Right.
But we are not quite there yet.
I kind of love that idea of it too. I mean, so this is sort of apropos because we're talking sort of near the tail end of the FTX auctions and the FTX estate auctions, and
Mhm.
so there are large positions of locked SOL that have been sold.
Yes.
The foundation has no real role in that. Labs has no real role in that. It's
Yeah.
between the FTX estate lawyers and the various purchasers.
Yep.
But one of the interesting components of that is that you are seeing basically time locked discount pricing.
Yes.
So you're saying like, oh, like a stake account that is locked for 4 years of SOL is trading at some form of a discount relative to the market price.
Mhm.
Um, it's interesting to think about, like, because the unbonding period is so short with stake accounts, like
Yes.
on a lot of Cosmos chains, it's 21
21.
days or longer. Um, that it's an interesting model to think about. How do you price that sort of 3-day willingness?
Right. Well, that again really depends on demand, right? So
Yeah.
so I'm not talking about the creditors, I'm talking about FTX crash,
Yes.
right? Like that discount rate, it could be like 10, 20, 30% haircut on your SOL, and you could have printed if you
Yeah.
were sort of taking an appropriately long-term perspective.
So
Right.
I want to get into this because I have a lot of questions about how LSTs behave under adverse economic conditions.
Sure.
But I want to let you get to the sanctum of today from
Yeah.
Unstake It first.
Okay, we'll circle
Yeah.
back. Yeah, so utilization rate is a proxy for it, right? Because it's kind of like demand, how much demand, and then sort of we jack up the prices. And I think there is almost a case to jack up utilization rate way above 5%, because
Right.
if SOL drops 30%, then you'd pay by definition less than. So, I mean,
Sure.
depends, but you'd pay all the way up to 30% to unstake your SOL. So I think we can definitely do like a lot better there with the sort of
Yeah.
utilization rate stuff. And of course, I think utilization rate is just, it's not perfect. It's a proxy. It's a proxy.
Yeah. I mean, there's all these interesting questions. I'm wondering if you've considered like derivative pricing.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
almost exactly like this, right? Like because volatility is high, and then you
Yeah.
sort of price. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. It's cool. Yeah.
So walk us through Sanctum of today. You guys have expanded extensively beyond running one stake pool and
Yeah.
having the Unstake It product.
Yeah.
What's the product suite look like today?
Yeah, so all of this is really trying to solve this problem of liquid staking, right?
Yeah.
And I think empirically we've seen, like, before we started, like liquid staking percentage was like 4%. Like the proportion of stakes sold that's liquid stake was less than 4%, right? And then post FTX, I think it dropped like way lower, like
Yeah.
maybe 2%. And now after Sanctum, we've gone up to 6%, right? Like that, and that was like primarily
Right.
driven by us and Jito and so on. So my goal really is that I think that most, if not all, SOL should be staked, and I think that most, if not all, SOL should be liquid staked as well.
So walk me through a little bit of why
Mhm.
you think that is. So, if someone is long Sol. They're not planning to sell for the next, let's call it, year or something along those lines. Why should they be in a liquid staking position relative to a native staking position?
Right. So I think it really depends, right? So number one, it really depends. Are you an institution or are you a sort of retail user? And I think we've actually built this liquid staking tokens called single validator liquid staking tokens, and we can come back to this. But the idea is that these charge no fees, no withdrawal, no deposit, nothing. And so sort of putting that into a liquid staking position is no worse than just native staking it.
Yeah.
But right, there are a couple of advantages. One is, of course, now you have the ability to use it in DeFi. Now, that's not going to be for everybody, but you always have this possibility. The other thing is that you have the choice to wait or not to wait, right? So you can delay unstake for free if and when you decide to exit your position. Delay unstake is always free, or you can choose in a time of crisis to, or if you want to just get your liquidity quickly, you can just pay. Right. And so that gives you, it's optional, it's free optionality. Right now,
okay.
Right. And then the third thing is that and this is more for the retail users, right? That if you're a retail user, the UX for a stake account is really quite shit. Like, despite first of all, wallets care most about tokens, right?
Yeah.
A lot of tokens, and maybe to some extent NFTs. But 90% of their UX design is focused on tokens and how to make that flow easy.
Yeah.
Stake accounts are kind of relegated to the back. Like, if try being a new user and yeah, go on.
Yeah, as far as I know, Backpack is the only wallet that lets you actually merge stake accounts without going through the CLI.
Yeah, so with a stake account, now you've got to activate it. You wait 2 days, you pick a validator and so on, and now it's activated. You want to buy more, or now you have lots of different stake accounts that you can't merge. You want to sell half of it, you have to split it off, and then it's just gross, right? And then when you deactivate it, so many people have come up to us. It's like, oh, I've unstaked my Sol, but I can't see where is it. Well, because there's this whole deactivating flow, and people are used to this token idea where you buy a token and sell a token in any sort of, and then you're in and out like this, right?
Right.
Any sort of arbitrary proportion of your position.
Yep.
And so liquid staking offers these retail guys a huge increase. Like, if you want to onboard people to Solana, and if you want to onboard people to staking, then it has to be the UX has to be a lot better than what we have right now with stake accounts. And I think liquid staking tokens are almost not completely risk-free, but almost risk-free and cost-free abstraction layer over something that is quite painful. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny, I hadn't thought of the UX component, but that's a super valid point.
Yeah.
So you guys have teamed up with a few sort of well-known protocols on Solana to actually help them launch liquid staking tokens. I know there's been a few sort of ideas of individuals launching liquid staking tokens as well. Walk me through sort of why, if I'm a protocol, I might want to launch my own LST.
Right. I'll get to that, but previously you had this question about the product suite of Sanctum. So let's go back to that, and then maybe this sort of will make more sense, right? So, okay, back to history lesson. We launched this unstake pool, right? And then again, all it does is service instant unstakes of stake accounts, which means LSTs. And then we decided, well, what else does this enable, right? Or how can we improve it? At this time, at the point, Jupiter did not have routing capability for the kind of LST to LST swap that we envision.
Right.
So at the start of this podcast, I mentioned, where you can change BSOL to GDOSOL by just pulling out the stake account and putting back in.
Yes.
Right. And so this was not a thing that was able to be done. And so we built this thing called a router, Sanctum router, which does exactly what this is. So if you're going from BSOL to GDOSOL, right, it will pull out the stake account and it will put it in, and that gives you a swap, even if there is zero native liquidity between these two LSTs. Right. So normally you'd need a BSOL, GDOSOL, AMM, or at least a BSOL SOL and a GDOSOL SOL AMM, so there's at least a hop in between. But here, between any two LSTs, as long as they have something in common, right, we can sort of do the transfer. So that was the second thing that we built and integrated into Jupiter, which was very well received. We also allow you to now stake and unstake from stake pools via Jupiter directly.
So sorry, just going back to the Jupiter example there. So behind the scenes, correct me if I'm wrong here, if this is how it works. So if I have GDOSOL and I want to move into BSOL,
yes,
I would basically go to Jupiter and I'd say, hey, I have 100 Jito Sol and I want to swap it for 100 B Sol.
Yes.
And the router would actually call to the Jito Sol stake account, stake pool contract, and say, I want to split off a stake account that has however much Sol it should have based on the exchange rate between Jito Sol or B Sol.
Well, the exchange doesn't matter, right? What happens if you're trying to?
Oh, I see. Yeah. But so it's basically on demand creating a stake account.
Yes.
And then it's moving that stake account over to it's reassigning it to the other
so
contract.
It's doing a delayed withdrawal from the Jito Sol stake pool to get a stake account. It's doing then a stake account deposit into the B Sol stake pool.
So it is the contract there is still missing out on one epoch of rewards.
The contract,
or does the stake account have to reactivate?
No, because the stake account is already activated when you pull it out, right?
Right.
Yeah, so it's activated into activated.
Got it.
Yeah, so you don't miss out on anything, and you can do it instantly and atomically. In fact, right? That's what you need for a swap. So that's like pretty cool tech. And then we have, as I said, we have instant stake and instant unstake powered by Jupiter as well. So that route. So basically, we are building all this routing stuff, right? And finally, we have this Infinity, which is currently our like flagship product. And what this is that it's the first ever LST of LSTs. All right, or basket of LSTs. You can think of it like this, or like an index fund. I mean, people have different words for it, but you can think of it as a basket of LSTs, right? It holds BSOL, GDOSOL, LaneSol. We have like 30 LSTs or something at this point, right? And it allows for swaps in between them. So it's kind of like a curve pool, but turned up to 11 basically, right? And so the idea, this is again, like all of these products are trying to solve the issue of like liquidity, right? And so when you hold this INF token, right, you are getting the staking, you're getting the basket average of the staking yields from all of these different LSTs, plus you're getting all kinds of the trading rewards, or the trading fees that accrue when swaps happen between these LSTs.
Oh, interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it is not only, so there might be an example where, for example, one LST has a slightly lower yield than another one. Right, like one's like super Jito optimized, the other is not using Jito at all for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So there might be a little. Your average might not be the true maximum that you could potentially get, but you have all these trading fees that sort of can make up or exceed what you'd get just using the liquid.
Exactly. So being a basket, it's obviously not going to be the best performing one.
Sure. Right.
By definition. Yes. Right. But right, you make these sort of trading fees in between all of the swaps. Yeah. And the bet is that when we increase the number of LSTs, and there are compelling reasons why we would want to, we can talk about it, right? When we increase this number of LSTs, when the number of LSTs explode, right, and trading volume gets big, then like infinite, like the sort of staking yields will get a smaller percentage, and then trading fees will sort of make a larger and larger share of the pool returns, which may potentially make it like the highest yielding. I mean, I don't know, right? No promises, but like that's the idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So walk me through a little bit of the use case for why people are trading between different LSTs. I would sort of assume that you pick one and you're like, I like this.
Yeah.
I'm going to stick with this.
Right. So this is actually my favorite part to talk about, because most people, and I think very much in the Ethereum space, people think of LSTs as just like stake pools or like different flavors of, and certainly, different flavors of the same thing, right? And, no offense to stake pools, I used to run one myself, right? And I think they do a great job in decentralization. But they're all kind of different flavors of decentralization, right? It's like, we have a little bit of a different delegation strategy. And don't get me wrong, that is needed, right? But, right, to sort of the vast majority of people, this was like a ho-hum kind of choice.
Sure.
What we are now we are basically blowing apart the space of what an LST can be. And I'll start with like a most boring one, and then we'll get to like the more sort of like crazy out there ones.
Great.
So let's talk about single validator LSTs, right? Yeah. For a long time, stake pools were sort of not that interesting to most folks because people had a personal relationship with their validator, they trust them and so on, right? And so, that like, they didn't get much uptake, right? With single validated LSTs, you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get the ability to delegate your stake exactly to the validator that you want, right? And not the, no extra commission from the stake pool,
Yeah.
right? But of course, you get all the benefits of being in a liquid staking token.
Yeah.
Right. Validators like this a lot for a couple of reasons. One is that right now validator economics are just getting more and more cutthroat. Like like you have to almost run 0%. You have to run 0% commission to get any delegation from a stake pool, right? And validators are feeling the pinch. I mean, now they're doing quite well because of the priority fees
They have
and stuff.
priority fees and those sorts
But
of. But yes,
and it's fundamentally quite commoditized, right? Like it's just bare metal, bare metal, bare metal.
Yeah.
With an LST, this allows validators to build a brand, and they are able to build a sticky stake, right? Because do not underestimate the like the surface, the token distribution area, right? When you have a token of your own, right, that helps a lot, right?
So I totally agree. I totally get that if we're talking about a token whose price fluctuates. But like, why would an LST like so for example, in the example of like I got a Jito airdrop, maybe that makes me more loyal to the Jito protocol, and maybe I'll go use the Jito liquid staking token because I have the Jito JTO token.
Right.
But for someone who's not like in the business of launching tokens, they're just a validator operator like BSOL or something like that. What is the sort of mechanic of stickiness?
Right.
What do you think it comes from?
On the base of it, just having this UX improvement of being easy to like, just swap into Jupiter into Lane. So as opposed to go to the staking tab and click my validator and wait 2 days, like that already is like a big uplift, right? And I don't want to solve. The other thing is that I think, it's like it's an opportunity for them to build a brand, because right now there aren't that many LSTs, and when you launch your LST, like all eyes are on you.
Yeah.
Now, as opposed to if you go to stakewiz.com and then there's like 2,000 of them, or you go to Phantom, it's this long list, right? It's tough.
Yeah.
And so and then like with that thing, you start being able to build like a Discord community and stuff like this, right? The other thing I would say is that validators are also trying very hard to innovate in this space. So a lot of them are airdropping, for example, staking, like block block rewards, which are traditionally not shared, priority fees, MEV, and so on, right? And so we've seen validators that adopt like almost like a LST facing strategy, or like a LST first strategy.
Yep.
Like are able to successfully differentiate themselves from the rest of validators. And to be honest, like there may be 1,000 validators that are honestly kind of ho-hum, right? They are not Solana native, and they may be delegating 20 different chains and
potatoes.
Exactly.
Potato validators.
Potato validators, and a lot of them, are not running like good infra. Or so that's validator LSTs. Let me move on to like project LSTs, and then so project LSTs are projects like Jupiter, Helios, Drift, etc. Choosing, they may or may not run their own validator. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, right? And then like the yield goes to the validator, or it goes directly to the project. So for projects, for DeFi projects or RPC nodes like Jupiter, Helios, they care a lot about getting their transactions included into a more and more congested chain.
Yeah.
And getting staked to their validator, is like a big way to get these transactions in, either via stake-weighted QoS or via being the leader in a particular block. Because once your validator is in the leader schedule, then that is your game, right? The other thing is that we are seeing LSTs do other things apart from being tied to validators. These are things like iSol, which is a Cubic Cubic grant. So Cubic is this public goods or public grants kind of platform, and the idea is that you give up your staking returns to the Cubic team, and you give up your staking returns, but in return that goes to fund public goods or public grants on Solana. That we have never seen before anywhere else. You have Pathfinder Sol, which is PathSol, that goes to fund and eventually mint an NFT that cannot be rugged. You have this idea of locking the LST into the NFT and burning the NFT to get your LST back. And so the idea is that this NFT is always going to, to maintain its floor price of whatever the LST was put in.
Yep.
That's cool. And then finally, we have this idea of individual LSTs. You can point your staking rewards to an individual, right? And and this individual gets the rewards, right? And I think this could be a big unlock in terms of artists, creators,
Interesting.
influencers and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that idea. Yeah, you could even go as far as to say like stuff that maybe is grant supported now could eventually become staking supported.
Yeah, I think, we have a couple of, you can VC fund your project, right?
Yeah.
You can do a public sale, or maybe you can do this kind of like staking, as a way to bootstrap something. That could be interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting idea because if you think about the size of most seed rounds, they're not actually raising that much capital unless they're like, super famous and over raising and, the era of the $20 million seed funds always makes me laugh a little bit. But many teams are raising $750K, right? Like that is a amount of money that you could conceivably get from staking rewards with enough people who believe in your idea. And then, it's kind of an interesting way of like investing in a company at no cost to yourself.
Yes, exactly. You give up the opportunity cost, but your principal is not, And so I can imagine this whole launchpad meta whereby, the company wants to, like almost like a Kickstarter, the company raises like 100,000 souls stake to their thing. That gives them funds to build out an MVP, eventually drop token or maybe not, or, do some sort of whatever with it, and then return the stakers something that they promised.
It's interesting because I never would have called it this, but it's sort of like an eigenlayer funding model. Right? Where like instead of like an eigenlayer, you're any restaking protocol, you're staking tokens with a validator in order to be able to run some sort of additional validated service.
Yes.
But instead of a validated service, you're just funding a company.
Yes, exactly.
It's a very interesting idea.
I think this is very cool personally. Because
have you seen any teams like go this funding route yet?
Yeah, so I take 2 minutes to talk about Path Soul, right? So the Path Soul is an NFT project that wants to do this unruggable NFT. And so right now there's about, I think, 20,000 souls staked to Pathfinders, which is, I think, that's quite a lot. It's,
sure, that's several $1 million.
Yeah, exactly. And that is going to use to fund the art and the development and eventually the mint, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, that idea of like, in the the NFT meta has suffered a lot because of all the rugs, right? You give your soul to this this protocol or this project after you mint the thing, and then you have to pray that they don't sort of abscond with it.
Right.
I don't know if I can say it on this podcast, but that's
fair.
all of
or
this.
Sometimes by no fault of the project alone,
True.
the floor price goes from 40 sold to 2.
They lose their artistic direction. They may not be actively malicious, but maybe people leave. They're not interested anymore. And
sure.
How do you distribute this back to holders? And so the idea here is that even if this project crashes and burns, right, everybody can just sort of pull their, principal back out, right? And by burning the NFT that was minted.
Super interesting.
And like, to me, that is like a much more attractive like value proposition to, if you're trying to,
Right.
Yeah.
Like you can still get, you can't get rugged beneath what the LST guarantee of the NFT is.
Exactly. Now, of course, if you buy on secondary,
sure,
that's an arbitrary. But at least I think that is the primary thing is that the primary sale, the
it's
minters,
like a built-in hedge.
Exactly, exactly. So I think like that is cool, and I would like this to be like the new meta for all NFT projects going forward. The other thing I would say is that I am really interested in this idea, and we're really going into the clouds now. So, of a soul economy. So it's like, so what do I mean by this soul economy? It's like people are holding soul pretty much for speculation, pretty much because like they think it's going to go up, right? And of course, this doesn't mean that you're short term. You might be like super long term,
right?
But I want people to start thinking about using their soul, not just holding it as a asset to speculate on, but as something that I can use to buy coffee, right? To buy art, to support this person, to like it's this circular soul economy where value is created and transferred and kept within the bounds of Solana.
Right.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So I want to pivot a little bit to some of the criticisms of LSTs. I want to get your kind of take on this.
Sure.
So systems that operate well in good or normal market conditions are fairly, I wouldn't say easy to build, but they're fairly commonplace. Systems that can handle the adverse market effects are much rarer, right? I think so. One of the few things you can predict, like not exactly clockwork, but I think we can be pretty sure in the next 5 years there will be some form of at least 60% market contraction from whatever the high ends up being
Yep.
down again, right? The
Yep.
bear markets are cyclical both in the traditional financial space and in the crypto space. So when FTX collapsed, that was a centralized entity that ran functionally zero blockchain infrastructure. They happened to own a bunch of Sol tokens, but we even saw on Ethereum with the collapse
really?
of FTX.
Wow. Okay.
So on the collapse of FTX, which had nothing really to do with the Ethereum network. I mean, there's Ether on there, but we saw the price of Ether start to crash the same way it did in all assets. And at the time, this is the same dynamic you're talking about, the sort of idea of like, oh, Sol's dropping by 30%, Ether's dropping by 30%. I want to get out of my position very quickly.
Yes.
But because there was not sufficient liquidity for Lido staked Ether, we saw I believe it was 7 to 10% price divergence between the price of Ether and the price of the Lido staked Ether.
Right.
We saw this on Solana too, but there was just so little percentage in stake pools that the impact was much minimized. But one of the things that happened with that effect was effectively the creation of a death spiral. So the expectation that my tokens are going to be worth less by the time I'm able to restake them means I'm willing to accept a higher discount on my stake tokens, which then effectively pushes the price of the unstaked asset lower, which then pushes the price of the staked asset lower. And you can get into these like really, really detrimental market cycles where, the stake one drops and then the unstake one drops, which pulls this one down, which pulls this down. You can get into these race to the bottoms. This is why traditional stock markets have circuit breakers, right? If the NASDAQ drops by a certain percent in a certain amount of time, they just pause trading for like 10 minutes and let everyone cool down and reassess their market positions. Crypto does not have circuit breakers. Button. It does. So I guess the question, the big lead up to the question, how do you think people should be thinking about liquidity requirements and unstaking and sort of death spiral prevention as the percentage of liquid staking on Solana goes from 2 to 4 to 6 to maybe 15, 20, 40% someday?
Right. I mean, the first thing I'll say is that, people worry a lot about sort of liquid staking token DPEGs. And I think DPEG is perhaps not the most accurate word, because what that really, I mean, a liquid staking derivative is basically it's stake Sol, right? Sure. And so it is almost natural that in times of great sort of liquidity preference, that the stake Sol should trade at the discount.
Yes.
To the unstake asset.
The same way locked Sol would trade at a discount to an unlocked Sol.
Absolutely, right? Yes. And when volatility becomes high, or like then it almost is natural for it to DPEG. That to me like is a rational market preference, and it's not something that we should try to avoid at all costs. That to me like that seems correct. Now that death spiral thing is a separate kind of question, right? Yeah. It's like, yes, given that the price, as in there is a divergence, but that divergence causes you to then readjust your discount rate and sort of sell into the market and so on and so forth. I think like that is super interesting. But do you think, does this have anything to do with stake Sol in particular, or is it just a Sol thing?
I think it's staked assets in particular. That at any time you have exit disparity, right, between something that is, so this is like the classic thing of if you have an oversupply in an economy of anything, right? Like you saw this all the time in COVID, right? Where our fundamental ability to predict supply chains in COVID went from pretty decent to pretty terrible. And not only just shortages, but you would see things like, I think it was the summer of 2022, there was about twice as much outdoor furniture made as was bought in 2021, because no one could buy outdoor furniture in like deck chairs, stuff you'd put out in your lawn.
Right.
So they massively overproduced in 2022, and not that many people bought it.
Right.
And so you saw these like 70% fire sales on like
Right.
really high-end outdoor furniture
Right.
in like July, not like in, October when you might have expected it to.
Right.
And so you can see these sort of whenever supply and demand get out of step, there are either premiums or discounts placed upon products. And time is an interesting unit on supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
And I that's the thing I think is sort of inherent to any of these types of cycles. I think you could see the exact same problem. In fact, you did see the exact same problem happen in 2008 in the financial crisis,
Mm-hmm.
where you would see markets that were, the after hours or pre-market trading would be wildly different than the previous day's close, and the market would open and just things would drop, right?
Right.
The difference is there you have, the federal government printing money and stepping in and buying toxic debt, so there's sort of two things my mind goes to. One is that blockchains actually do need some form of central bank. That maybe the Solana Foundation should have a much more aggressive treasury management, not just the Solana Foundation, the Sui Foundation, the Aptos Foundation, whatever, should have a much more aggressive treasury deployment mechanism that much more closely limits what the Federal Reserve and central banks do in periods of crisis, which is be that buyer of last resort.
I think that is fascinating because if you talk about this death spiral the Solana Foundation is very happy to make this arbitrage of a couple of days, right? Because you guys are appropriately long-term holders.
Now, I'll say I'm not a lawyer, but conceptually, we're very comfortable with that sort of thing.
Yeah. As in, whether or not you can do it is a separate statement. But
we would have no problem saying, oh, we will take on the 3-day risk of unstaking SOL because we weren't going to sell it anyway. We're going to give it out as a grant in 2 years or something.
Exactly. And so for Solana Foundation or anyone who's appropriately long-term, right, buying this thing at a discount, like at the 30-50% discount is like a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
Like it's literally sort of free money, if you're not concerned about how the price moves in 3 days.
Sure, which the foundation wouldn't be anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's funny because no one conceives of the role of a foundation as that. Like I think if you polled everyone who works at foundations everywhere, no one would say that is the sort of like market intervention activity that it would be appropriate for a foundation to engage in.
Right.
In fact, you actually saw the Ripple lawsuit was sort of about exactly that to some extent on the other side, but yes.
Yeah, so I mean, perhaps it's a legal. I think I honestly.
But do you think we need something like that in the space if we are going to see LSTs make up a huge percentage?
I mean, personally, I have been sort of lobbying for this, right? I think, especially when you know that this is not like a systemic. I think there's a case to be made for like maybe there's like a systemic fault in the, in the blockchain or something, and then sort of coming in and buying might be conceived as market manipulation. But if you have a place where, if you're in a situation where the market is kind of spiraling on its own, then I feel like it could make sense both sort of like, ethically and also like pragmatically for the foundation to come in and essentially pick, money off the floor in some sense.
Right.
Right. But again,
yeah.
Are you able to stomach this sort of legal? I'm not sure.
I don't know. I mean, I think people forget that the U.S. government made bank on the bailout.
Right.
Like they deployed $700 billion or whatever it was, and that returned like way more than that. Even with all the write-offs from stuff that truly went to zero,
right.
The government made money for the taxpayer. It helped to actually shore up the budget a little bit in those sort of extreme market operations it did back in 2008 and 9.
If you think about the unstaked pool, it basically, or the Sanctum reserve pool, it basically is the buyer of last resort in some sense.
Right. It's just not big enough to handle the market of that size yet.
Well, yeah, it has to grow in lockstep with...
Of course.
And then the other thing is that, of course, there is no free lunch, right? So I mean, the foundation has a unique position because it may not need to stake its soul.
It's also a nonprofit. It's not. We are anti-profit motivated.
Okay, perfect, right? But of course, if I am opening, so right now the reserve pool is not open to public depositors.
Yeah.
Right. But I think, like, if there was a non-profit organization like the foundation, then there would be a very strong case, for the foundation to be able to use the reserve as a buyer of last resort to do exactly this thing. But if you open it up to the open market, now you have to be thinking like, okay, is this pool going to actually perform better than just staking your soul, especially because its job is to catch the falling knife.
Right. It's kind of interesting though, because like in a hypothetical world where there's an extreme market event again, and let's say I'm very long on Sol and I happen to have a bunch of unstaked Sol at the time.
But that's the thing. Why would you ever have unstaked Sol at the time?
Yeah.
Right? Like
right. This is the challenge.
If we believe that most, like, as in, it's kind of like,
right.
You can't have it both ways. If you're a long-term investor, you're almost definitely going to stake your Sol because why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Right? And so you need somehow this pool, like unstaked Sol that is ready to come, and you have to be appropriately long-term so you don't mind to take this. But then your Sol will be staked. So it's like, it is kind of like
you see the catch-22 you get into, right?
So yeah.
Because even by the same logic, it's sort of like, if the foundation had a pool of Sol sitting around to do those type of extreme market, work, the question would be, well, why aren't you delegating it out to help support new validators and all these other types of things?
Yes,
so
and I think
it's interesting.
I think the answer has to be like, we care about the systemic. We care that this system runs. We care that LSTs, like grow, and we care about the health of this whole DeFi economy, because the LSTs are the backbone, are the bedrock of DeFi, right? And so like the foundation has to think like, okay, this probably makes, like, there is a case for having a pool of unstaked Sol, not doing anything, not being delegated, so that it can make sure that this entire ecosystem is healthy.
Fascinating. Well, before we wrap up today, what's next for Sanctum? What's coming soon? Where can people learn more about the project?
Yeah, so we are currently running a points program. I don't like to call it a points program. It's a user experience program. It's Wonderland. It's wonderful. So we try to do something very different, and users love it, right? There was a lot of fatigue in existing programs, and we really want to do something fun and interesting and get the community together.
Yeah,
that's something I really hope everyone checks out, right? The other thing is that we are launching a token. I don't know if I can say it. We are launching a token. So I have on my Twitter, x.com/SolEconomist, written a draft proposal of what Sanctum's tokenomics will look like. And I want to use this opportunity to get everyone here who is, interested and long-term aligned to give me comments on what our token look like. And I want to set this whole new meta of, instead of tokenomics being something that's dictated from top down, right, to be something that we really try and build with the community together. Because I think that Sanctum uniquely, and compared to a lot of protocols, it really needs the community support in order to grow. We want to, like, this whole LST revolution is not possible without all our partners and without everybody who believes in LSTs. And so that's what I really want, people to come and reach out and give us your comments and tell us how we can improve.
Awesome. Love it. Well, FP, thank you for joining us on Validated.
Thank you very much.